As we stay with talking about Census 2022, Johannesburg lobby group Iranti is accusing Stats SA of discriminating against the LGBTQI plus people and community in Census 2022. Let's find out why. This is the view of the organization. Jabu Pereira, the executive director of Iranti, joining us this morning. Jabu, good to have you with us. Thanks for your time. So what is the issue here exactly?
Well, we discovered when we registered, many of us from the LGBTI community who registered onto Census, that Stats SA was only making a determination and counting based on a sex disaggregation, which is male and female. And that definition that Stats SA has associated to male and female are only people who are assigned female at birth and male at birth, which means what we call a cisgender community, so people who are assigned female and identify and live as female. And so therefore there's an entire population of people within a gender identity category, such as non-binary people and such as trans women and trans men, that will not be counted within the census. And that's quite a significant part of a population of South Africa, be it a minority population. Similarly, the intersex community, children who are born intersex are not counted within the census. So we know why census is important, because it contributes towards state policy and legislation interventions. So, for example, we know about child-headed households because of data collection. We know of female-headed households because of data collection. So there's quite a significant effect that the exclusion of gender identity, for one, is taken out of the census. And secondly, the other issue regarding the exclusion of sexual orientation out of the census. So basically, census a decade later, since 2011, is only counting cisgender people and heteronormative family households. And so how is it possible for a state to then make interventions based on sexual identity, gender identity and sexual orientation and sex characteristics?
Well, the point I was about to make is, how is it that in 2022 it's not being included, considering how vocal and how much government talks about the LGBTIQ plus community that's not being included? So how would it be, if it was possible? I don't know if it's going to be possible. We'll speak to Census. How would you like this remedied? Obviously, the damage has been done. Severe critics will say the community is being discriminated against, which is a fair argument. But how would you want to fix this now, if it were possible? If Census was watching, you and I talk right now, Stats SA was watching.
Well, we've been in discussions with them now around possible interventions. One of those possibilities is not to wait for another decade to do this level of counting at household level. So there are possibilities that this could be added to another counting process, that Census could embark on. And we're hoping to meet with the Statistician General in March, just after, this process. It's too late. We don't know why they removed gender out of it. We don't know why they categorized race as black, white, and other. I don't think anybody wants to be classified as an other. And so there are a number of challenges around why we're doing this data. And as you're saying, a decade later, it's almost like the state as a whole doesn't know what it's doing, because there are, for example, the Department of Home Affairs has created a draft policy that's going to Cabinet next month, called the Identity Management Policy, which will become law. And that policy recognizes the diversity of South Africa, both in sexual orientation, in gender identity, and in sex characteristics. And so this impacts, for example, on what our future ID numbers and identity would be, whether we would keep the male-female category in the identity documents. So if Stats SA is a significant contributor to data, why is it that they haven't taken into account what the rest of the state is doing? So it feels like there's not enough communication across cabinet, possibly in this regard. But it is a problem because it's very difficult when you go to a state to advocate for legal gender recognition, for example, and the department may say, well, there are no transgender people in South Africa. And without data, it's very difficult, even for us as civil society, to make those interventions. And worse so for the state, because they're not being supported with adequate data from Stats SA.
So what kind of damage could this be causing? I imagine as well identity and emotional damage to LGBTQI plus members as well, because when you say the word other, I actually cringed a little bit as well. It seems like a very archaic way of doing this. So could a suggestion be, and I'll leave this as my last question to you, Jabu, is to still be counted as 2022, maybe a census 2022 plus? Is that maybe another way of looking at it, or would that also be considered discriminatory to have a separate census? I'm trying to think where I want to go with this. A separate census that has not been including communities in the current census. I hope you understand where I'm trying to go with this, as sensitive as a way as I can.
Yeah, they have to make an intervention in this regard because the LGBTI community is a significant population. Like, for example, one of the ironies in South Africa is that we have the highest murder rate against the LGBTI community on the continent and among the highest in the world. And yet we're not able to identify significant interventions with regards to safety and violence, because the LGBTI community itself is not homogenous. There are many economic classes and poverty levels within the LGBTI community that require significant intervention. So the data that Stats SA can collect could, contribute to understanding why LGBTI people face stigma and discrimination and exclusion in the workplace, in access to housing, in regards to safety and a whole access to healthcare, etc. There's a whole range of issues that this data could contribute towards improving the rights of the LGBTI community.
All right, Jabu, I appreciate your time. It's almost this fight against GBV, which gets so much attention as well. One could almost say it's identity-based violence as well, which needs to be dealt with so harshly and so quickly as well. But I really appreciate his time this morning. Jabu Pereira from Iranti joining us about this. And no doubt it could be a question we could ask to you, our viewers, as well in the coming days. But